Hi,
Hello.
Sugar and Spice is back with you this new year.
Happy New Year. A little
Yes.
late though.
True.
Yeah.
But we're back with two more stories for you and hope you like these that we've specially chosen for this new year, to start this new year.
Yes. So the first story, Shrija, please go ahead.
So the story I have for you today is called The Lotus Eaters. This one is by Somerset, Maugham. Yet another favorite of mine at the cost of repeating myself. But here goes. The narrator starts off the story by saying that most people live lives based on the circumstances that are thrust on them. So they just accept what's there, what's going on, and they say, okay, this is how we will live. And some of them are happy with it. Some of them may not be too happy with it, but they still continue at the same pace. Like rail cars, he says, like trains, they move back and forth on the same railway lines. But there are very few people who chart out different courses for their own lives, decide how they're going to lead their own lives. And this is the reason why Thomas Wilson interested him. So this narrator had gone to visit his friend at the Piazza in Capri, and he was staying there with him in a luxurious villa. And when his friend talked to him about Thomas Wilson, he immediately said, "No, I don't believe this. It can't be true. What you're saying is just a whole bunch of nonsense." He says, "No, it's true. That's what I heard about the man." So the narrator was very, very interested in meeting Thomas Wilson and to hear the story from his own mouth, not just hearsay. While they were waiting on a terrace that overlooked the Bay of Naples, at that time when the sun set and the sky was lit up in all kinds of colors, a beautiful sight, the people got together, they were all gathered on the terrace, and it was a very laid back kind of life on the island, something which is why the narrator was there for a vacation. And people watched the sunset, then they talked, they had wine, they shared stories. It was a very pleasant life. So when this was going on, the narrator's friend pointed out to a man sitting at a distance in a blue shirt and said, "Look, look, that's Thomas Wilson." So said, "That's the man?" The narrator found him to be a very ordinary looking fellow, nothing out of the world, and yet he was very curious. So he told him, "You must introduce me to this man." And the friend said, "Yes, of course. In fact, he's coming towards us. You can speak to him right away." Sure enough, the person called Thomas Wilson walked up to them, and the friend introduced him to the narrator. And the narrator found him to be a very, very ordinary looking fellow in typical beach clothes, sandals and a loose canvas pants, material was canvas, and the shirt and his pants looked quite crinkled, but his face was somehow, it didn't go along with the clothes. His face looked like it would look better on a suit, on a pinstripe suit, like maybe he could be an insurance agent, somebody, or a branch manager. That was the kind of look, a serious look that the man sported, but he was dressed in a very, very island style. He spoke to him and they left. They left after that for dinner, but this interest to meet him continued, and it happened soon after. Because they had planned a trip, a kind of sightseeing trip all around the island, and a friend had invited Thomas Wilson to join them. But at the last minute, the friend, for certain reasons of his own, couldn't make it. He wasn't feeling up to the trip. So the narrator and Thomas Wilson made the trip just by themselves. And after they finished a tour of the island, which Thomas Wilson seemed to know very well, he knew everything, every spot that could be seen, and it was like he was going with him and as a tour guide. And when they got back and sat down for dinner, it was after lots of wine that this man, who seemed quite reserved, opened up to him. And the narrator asked him, "How many years have you been on this island?" And he says, 15. And he waited for him to continue. He was not very keen on continuing at first, but then he did speak about it, and he said, "Yes, I have 10 more years to go on this island." So he said, the narrator wanted to know what exactly had happened. He said, "Look, I don't have a family to speak of. I lost my wife long back, and I had a child too, and she died as well. She stayed with a grandparent, and old woman was too foolish and didn't know how to bring up a little child, and so I lost my daughter as well." And he spoke about it in very dispassionate terms. So the narrator asked him, don't you have any relatives, people who are close to you? He says, not really people who would really miss me if I wasn't there. So that's when I decided. I had come here when I was just 34 to this island. And when I saw this island, I fell in love with this place and I decided I should come back here again. And when I left, in fact, I thought to myself, what have I got to lose? Why don't I come and stay here after this? Why do I need to work every day doing the same thing? Because as he said, he told the narrator, don't we all work and earn money so that we can live a life of leisure, of pleasure? So why don't I do this now at the right age? Of course, being a banker, I told myself that it was not a decision that could be taken right away, and I waited for a whole year, but my decision was the same. So I decided I would come and spend the rest of my life on this island. I didn't want to work anymore. But then, of course, I was not a fool. I knew that I didn't want to come here and live in poverty. I wanted to have a small place to stay, a caretaker to look after my house, make my meals, perhaps buy enough money to buy books occasionally, money for emergencies. So for all this, I needed to have a plan, and that's what I did. I planned, if I sold my house, the money I got from my house, my savings, the gratuity that I would get if I retired before my time, with all the money that I got, I could buy an annuity for myself. An annuity for 25 years only. But then I decided that I would be almost 60 by then. And people normally don't live beyond 60. So the narrator stopped him at that point and said, but people don't necessarily die at 60. He said, no, I get that. But then don't you think 25 years of sheer pleasure and indolence is more than enough? Would I need more? The narrator listened to this and he understood what Thomas Wilson was implying, that he would take his life at the end of it. And it sent a creep up his, he had goose flesh, kind of a spine chilling feeling, but he let it be. And Thomas Wilson said, so that's it. I came to the island. I've lived comfortably for 15 years. I have 10 years more to go. What more would I want? Wouldn't you say? And they parted, and the narrator couldn't help thinking, this was Thomas Wilson was leading a grossly selfish life. But at the same time, he wasn't doing any harm to anybody else. He wanted to follow pleasure. He was very clear that he wanted to live a life of comfort without doing anything, and that was what he did. A very interesting experiment, and especially when it came from somebody who looked as ordinary as him, so much of planning. So the narrator says that he left a few days later, but he could come back to the island only 13 years later on, because the war had broke out and there were things that kept him back. So when he came back, his friend was no longer as wealthy as he used to be, so he had moved into a smaller place. So he no longer lived in the villa that he had shared with him when he came on his previous visit. So he stayed at a hotel, but they met for dinner at a restaurant. And when they were talking about, he asked him where he was staying now. So his friend told him, you remember that little place that Thomas Wilson had? I've moved to that place. I've built in a room, and now it's a very comfortable place for me. Of course, not as lavish and fancy as the place that I was staying in earlier, but it's comfortable. I like the place. And that's when the narrator actually thought of Thomas Wilson. He had forgotten about him, even if he had been interesting at that point. So he asked him, so did he commit suicide as he had planned? 25 years have gone by. So the friend shook his head and said, no, that's a very grim story. So he says, what happened? And he tells him, and the narrator tells us at this point that Thomas Wilson had made a proper plan for his life. But there's one thing that he hadn't planned for. And that is that if you live a life, many years of absolutely no productivity, where your mind doesn't work, when your body is not actually engaged in doing anything productive, you lose your strength of character. You lose your strength of will. It's like he says that if you walk on level ground all the time, the muscles that are needed to climb mountains no longer function. So you have to be active for things to work out, and that is what happened with Thomas Wilson. At the end of 25 years, he had lost the will to die. So he had planned to take his life immediately after that, but he kept delaying. He kept delaying the process, and because the money that he had planned for till the last penny had all run out, he had no money left. But because he had been a person who paid all his bills and his past record was impeccable, he was able to borrow from people, local people, and he managed like that for a year. But after a year, people refused to lend him any more money. Now, this place that he stayed in, he had taken a house. In fact, on his first visit, the narrator had visited him there. It was a little house inside an estate, and the owner of the house, the landlord, his wife used to come down and cook for him. Asunta used to come down and cook for him. It was a very cozy arrangement, a two-room house with a kitchen, and he was very happy. The narrator also found it very interesting. It had a fantastic view. So, coming back to the present, the landlord let him stay for a while because Asunta had a soft corner for him, and she cooked for him and stretched it out as long as they could. But after a while, the landlord said after more than a year, he asked him to leave if he couldn't pay the rent. But then that was the day before he had to move out. He decided to end things, and he went in, closed the door, closed all his windows, and he left the charcoal brazier on and went to sleep. But Asunta found him the next day, still alive, but had been severely poisoned because of the charcoal brazier. They rushed him to the hospital. He survived, but he was never the same again. He hadn't totally lost his mind, but he had changed and he wasn't his normal self. Now, when they brought him back, they didn't know what to do because he was an Englishman, and they didn't know if they sent him back, he didn't have anybody there. They didn't know what to do here in Italy. They didn't know what to do with him here. He had no one here either, and he had no money to talk of. So at that point, Asunta, because she had worked for him and he'd always been a very good tenant and had been very nice, they had shared a good friendship. She said he could move into her woodshed near the cottage where they lived, and he moved in there. It was not at all a convenient place, especially not for a man of his standards, but he stayed there. And the narrator stops and asks his friend, but were they nice to him? Was he happy there? So he says he didn't know exactly what was happening to him, so he was more like a child. Like I told you, he'd lost his he wasn't himself. Thomas Wilson wasn't the same. But when he went there, Asunta was very kind, and she shared whatever peasants' food they made, so it was not the kind of food he was used to. And the landlord, of course, was quite mean to him and made him do things like cleaning out the cowshed and things like that to earn his stay there. But that's how it is. You may see him now, but don't stop to talk to him. I tried talking to him, but he doesn't recognize me anymore, the friend said. So after listening to this story, the narrator feels terrible, and he says, my God, what a rotten way to have a life, turn out like this. So the friend says, but he chose it himself. You can't blame anyone for it. And as they talk and move on along the way, they sense a movement behind the trees. The friend tells him, don't look, he's there. If you go, he gets scared, don't try to approach him. So the narrator says that I could see him from from my periphery vision, I could see him, and I saw him hiding behind a tree, and when we walked ahead, he just ran away, scared to see us. So he says that was what happened to Thomas Wilson, and I left with a heavy heart. And he continued like that for 6 more years in that particular condition, the way he was. And one fine day, they found him dead on the hillside, on the same spot that he had always liked sitting and watching. There was a spot where he could see 2 rocks in the distance. And the narrator says, sometimes I can't help thinking that he must have died from the beauty of the sight. And the story ends there. The Lotus Eaters. Yes,
It's so beautiful. So I was so engrossed in the story.
Yeah, no, the one, maybe I should say who these Lotus Eaters are. Why it's
Why
called the
it's
Lotus
called
Eaters.
Lotus
Lotus Eaters, actually, we get it from Greek mythology, where you had these people who lived on an island where they lived on the flowers and the fruits that they got from the lotus tree. Now, the lotus tree gave fruit and flowers which worked as a narcotic. So these people would eat that, and they would live in a state of,
it was like a
sleep
drug.
and like a
Oh,
drug, yeah.
okay,
And they would forget their family. They would never go back. So they were lost to the lotus tree food. So, which is why when we speak of lotus eaters, we talk about people who believe in living lives of pleasure and with no touch of reality. They're lost to the real world. They only believe in indolence and living like that. The Lotus Eaters. So you have the story of a man who planned
A lot.
but can you plan everything?
Yes.
Is
That's
the
a big
question.
question. Yeah.
So my story ends there.
Lovely, lovely. Very, very, yeah. You can't think of, what would have gone on his mind after, he has completely lost his mind also.
And how you
What would
can
have,
lose,
yeah.
and how you can lose the will, and if you lose your will, there's nothing.
True.
You're just a shell, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we move
Beautiful
on. Yeah.
story.
So that was a story for you from me, and now we have Deepthi with yet another interesting story. So Deepthi, over to you.
So my story for the day is Nightingale and the Red Rose by the famous short story writer Oscar Wilde. It's a very famous story. I'm sure many of you might have heard it. So the story goes like this. There's this beautiful nightingale who sits in the garden and sings for everyone. She sings the sweetest of the songs, mostly talking about love. And all she wants is true love to be filled everywhere. She sings for the nature, for the plants around, for the animals around, and of course for the humans. So she, as usual, she was sitting in the garden and singing a beautiful song one day, when she listens to this conversation between two young students. The boy who is asking the love of his life, a girl, to dance with him in the princess party which is going to happen the next day. So he asks her, "Would you like to dance with me? I would be very, very happy." He's so taken by her beauty and he's so much in love with her. His eyes are filled with what he's feeling, and the nightingale just watches them talk. The boy tells her, "Please, please, will you dance with me?" So the girl, she smiles and she's shy. She's happy that the boy is, telling her to dance with him and all that. She's enjoying the attention. But at the same time, she's saying, "Okay, let me see, let me think." Then she says, "Yeah, I will dance with you, but one condition." So he asks, "What is the condition?" "Get me a red rose, then I will dance with you." So he says, "Okay, a red rose, is that what you want? Okay, I shall find one. I'll get it for you." And then he sets off to find a red rose. He goes around the garden. It's a beautiful garden with all kinds of trees and flowers. He goes around looking everywhere. But surprisingly, he finds roses of all colors, but not a red rose. After walking around for a long time, he really gets tired and he sits down on a bench in the garden and starts to cry. There's a tiny green lizard going up the tree. He asks, "Why is the young lad crying?" Now, there's this colorful butterfly which flies by, and she also asks the nightingale, "Why is he crying?" The nightingale says, "I know why he is crying. I heard the conversation. He wants a girl to dance with him at a party tomorrow, but the girl has told him that only if he brings a red rose will she dance with him. But he is not able to find one." That is the sorrow in which he is crying. He is so much in love with that girl, he does not want to lose her just for this reason. So the nightingale says, "Let me see what I can do for him. True love should not be sad like this. I can see true love in his eyes, and I cannot bear the sight of true love being sad." So she goes around looking for some way to find a red rose. So he goes to a rose tree and asks for a red rose. "I'll sing my sweetest song for you all night. Will you give me a red rose?" So the tree replies, "How I wish I could, but I'm so sorry. I grow white roses. Why don't you go a little further? There's another rose tree over there." So she goes to another rose tree and asks, "Will you give me a red rose? I'll sing for you all night the sweetest song ever." So the tree replies, "I really wish I could, but I grow yellow roses. There's my brother right around the corner, which is a tree which gives red roses. So please go and ask. I'm sure he will give you a red rose." So happily she goes and asks the tree, which is actually the tree, the red rose tree is very close to the cottage in which the boy lives. So she says, okay, it is all the better that the tree is right next to his cottage. It will be easy for him to take the rose. But when she goes and asks the tree, she gets a very sad reply. So the tree says, yes, I grow red roses, but this year winter has been so harsh that all my flowers are frozen and all my branches are broken by the storm. So all year I am not going to have any roses. So the nightingale is sad. Oh my God, this is terrible. What do I do now? I thought I'll be able to be of some help to this boy, but what do I do now? Is there no other solution? So the rose tree replies, yes, there is a solution, but I really don't even want to tell it to you. It is that horrible. It is something which is very, very sad and heartbreaking. I don't want to tell it to you. I said, whatever it is, I'm ready to, take it. Please tell me. So the rose tree slowly says, there is one way in which you can make one red rose bloom on my tree. But you will have to make it bloom by singing all night in the moonlight. Using your music in the moonlight, you can make the flower bloom, and you can color it with the blood of your heart. You have to press yourself against one of my thorns, and the blood of your heart should flow into that flower and color it red. The nightingale thinks for a while and says, death is a good price to pay for true love. I really don't mind. If I am such a normal creature, if my life is not more precious than a man's life, if my death would mean that they live happily and he gets his true love, I don't mind sacrificing. And that is what she does. She happily flows back to the boy and tells him, don't worry, I'm going to make sure that you get that red rose. So he asks, how is that possible? He says, I'm going to make music the whole night in the moonlight, and I'm going to make that tree bloom, and I'm going to color that flower with the blood of my heart. The boy really does not make any sense out of it, because all he knows is the knowledge from books. He is not very much aware of the language of nature. So he just says, whatever, I'm very disappointed, I'm sad. Can you sing for me? So she sits there and sings for him a beautiful song, and then she flies back to the red rose tree. And that night she begins to sing the most beautiful song she's ever sung. And after a while, in the moonlight, the whole garden is enjoying her music, and after a while the tree starts to bloom. The red rose is slowly opening up. Though it's not yet colored, it blooms to a certain size, and then the tree is crying. The tree is telling the nightingale, oh nightingale, I'm so sorry to say this to you, but please press your heart closer to the thorn. So she had to press her heart to the thorn of the tree so that the flower gets colored with her blood. It's not, the pressure with which you are pressing onto the thorn is not enough. The blood is not reaching the flower. Press closer, O nightingale, press closer. And she presses closer, and her music becomes louder and wilder with the pain that she's going through. This goes on for a while, and the tree says again, before it is day, press closer, O nightingale, so that the flower is colored before the break of the day. And she presses closer and closer, and suddenly the thorn touches her heart, and the flower turns into a crimson red. Along with the blooming of the beautiful red flower, there is a very, very beautiful nightingale with a beautiful mind which falls down from the tree. It drops down dead. And then the boy opens his window in the morning and he's surprised to see that the tree right before his window has bloomed a new red rose. He does not know the story behind it, but nevertheless he goes and picks it up. He plucks the flower and he runs to his girl. When he goes, he finds her sitting outside and playing with her dog very casually, and she, as soon as she sees him, she does not give a very welcoming look, but he runs to her and he says, "See what I found for you." So she gives a very different expression from what she was the day before. So he says, "See what I found." "What?" "A red rose. That's what you asked for, right? So you're going to come to dance with me tonight. That's what you promised." So she just shrugs her shoulder and she says, "Oh, that. But I'm getting something more precious, The Chancellor's son has promised me something more precious. After all, jewels are more precious than flowers, right? He has offered me the most precious and beautiful jewels, and I think I'm going to dance with him. You may please go." The boy was disappointed, sad, heartbroken. He runs back to his cottage with the red rose in his hand and he says, "True love? Is there something called true love? No, true love does not exist. I don't believe in true love." And he throws the red rose onto the road, wherein a vehicle comes and crushes it. The boy did not know that what a precious life had been taken for that red rose, and just for his momentous joy, he had wanted that red rose. And even the girl just betrayed him just for a better offer that she got. But at the end of it all, it was the beautiful mind of the nightingale which was ignored. And it is a very, very sad ending to this story.
Yes.
But the way in which they have described the way the nightingale makes the flower bloom was the most attractive, at the same time the most painful part for me in this story. Yeah, so that
Very
is how
beautiful story.
the story ends.
Also goes to show that true love usually goes unnoticed, isn't it?
True.
The sacrifice and the love that went, the whole thing that happened behind it was not even seen or acknowledged.
Correct.
It's a story that can be looked at a very deep level.
Yes. Yes.
What exactly is love? What is true love here?
And if there is a condition, love is supposed to be unconditional, right? So if there is a condition, if your lover is putting across a condition, that itself I feel is a red flag. In many of the relationships today, it is a lot of material. It is more material than when you talk about true love, which is just a feeling from the heart. So these stories depict so many layers to it, like you said.
Yes.
You can look at it in very different angles. And even the nightingale, no creature is small, no creature is of less value. The way she looked at true love, and she was ready to sacrifice her life for it.
But that's again because she believed in the true love.
true
But
love.
was there true love at all?
Absolutely.
Is a question. And whose love is the deepest over here? The nightingale's.
True,
Isn't
yes.
it? So her belief in love.
Yes.
Which again is something
Yes,
you
yes.
believe
If
in
you
something.
have faith
yeah.
in something, then I thought this was a very, very sweet short story that I read.
Very poignant and evokes a lot of feelings. And I'm sure you would have enjoyed listening to this story as well.
Yes, I hope you enjoyed both the stories.
Yes.
And we'll be back with more as promised. Please give us your feedbacks and suggestions and
Yes.
comments.
Suggestions are welcome.
Absolutely.
And, we're always here to listen to what you say.
Yes.
And please go ahead, keep listening. Like, share, subscribe.
So it's bye-bye from Sugar and Spice for now.
Bye.
Bye.
Love you.
Love you all.